Hello, welcome to Dr. Sam's Anatomy classes. Myself is Dr. Azmi Mohsin, and in this lecture I will be telling you about the afferent functional columns of the brainstem. But it's always advised to follow this lecture from my previous two lectures. One was on the attachments of the cranial nerves to the brainstem and the nuclei of the cranial nerves, and just before this I uploaded a lecture upon the efferent functional columns. So if you're new to this, please follow my previous lectures and then you will understand this lecture even more better. So now we will talk about the afferent functional columns, means the incoming or the sensory fibers to the brainstem, how they are arranged in the brainstem. You know them, that afferents are placed laterally. The afferent nuclei, they actually present in the alar lamina, which is placed lateral to the basal lamina, and the basal lamina was having vertical placed nuclei of the efferent functional columns. Okay, so let's begin. Now here in this diagram you are seeing the it's a section of brainstem, right? So here you seeing is brainstem. Upper portion is the midbrain, then this nodular, the bulged portion is the pons, the lower portion is the medulla, right? And then the medulla extending downwards in the form of spinal cord. Okay, so in the brainstem you are seeing that here in the midline you are seeing here it's the median plane. Got it? So it's the median plane. So another thing that you'll notice here, that these functional columns, they are bilaterally placed. Look here, this is another sulcus here, and that is called sulcus limitans. This is called sulcus limitans. Okay, then on either sides of the midline, this portion here, both the sides, this is called the basal lamina, and there are three functional columns here, medial to lateral. The medial most is the general somatic efferent, then lateral to that is special visceral efferent or the branchial efferent for the muscles derived from the branchial arches, and this one was for the skeletal muscles derived from the somites or somatomeres. And the lateral most is this one. This is for the smooth muscles, the autonomic fibers, the parasympathetic fibers to innervate the smooth muscles of the head and neck region, and this is called general visceral efferent functional column. Okay, so that's how the efferent nuclei are arranged in the basal lamina on the either side of the midline. Then lateral to that on both the sides of the sulcus limitans, this side and this side, this is sulcus limitans. So lateral to that it's this alar lamina. Now alar lamina, one thing before that, let's say this is bilaterally symmetrical, right? So you can see if you fold this image, you will find this functional column overlaps to this overlaps to this overlaps to this, and similarly this functional column overlaps to this and that way. So you are seeing that actually it's completely a bilaterally mirror image of the two sides. So yes, so here I'm talking is about the alar lamina, now the lateral place. This is for the afferents. Now another important thing is the two general visceral afferent and efferent are placed on either sides of the sulcus limitans. Now because if you fold this unilaterally, if you see only of the one half of the brainstem, and if you fold this image on this sulcus limitans, you will find that this functional column, the medial most functional column in the lamina is general visceral afferent. So here it's efferents, the adjacent column to the the two visceral, general visceral afferent and efferent, they lie adjacent to each other. So this functional column is general visceral afferent. But there is also a special visceral afferent for the special sensations, and basically here it's the taste sensation. So that functional column is actually merged with this general visceral afferent. So special visceral afferent and general visceral afferent, the two functional columns merge here. So if you see the special, actually this is a combined thing, but the special visceral afferent will overlie. If you fold the image on this side, on this line, so this will overlap to this. So special visceral afferent will overlie to the special visceral efferent. Now lateral to that is general somatic afferent, sensations from the external receptors from the body, skin and all, peripheral receptors. So those sensations of pain, temperature, pressure, vibration, touch and all, these are brought into this functional column, and which is completely taken up by a single longitudinal nucleus, that's the nucleus of trigeminal, although it has three parts. So this is general somatic afferent, and if you fold the image, you will find that this will overlap to this functional column. So these afferents, general somatic afferent, will overlie to this general somatic efferents. Got it? However, you also have an additional afferent, the lateral most afferent functional column, that is special somatic afferent, and that is for the special sensations of hearing and balance, right? The two nuclei of the vestibular cochlear nerve are placed here. So this is how I believe I have tried to explain you, and you got to understood. Now we will I'll be talking about this afferent functional columns individually, separately, each of them, right? Remember, there are four functional columns. Medial to lateral, it is general visceral afferent, special visceral afferent. The two merge together and form a single nucleus in this longitudinal functional column. That is the only nucleus called the nucleus tractus solitarius. And then lateral to that is this general somatic afferent, and that is by the trigeminal nucleus, and lateral most is the special somatic afferent, which includes vestibular and cochlear. Cochlear is the most laterally placed nucleus because ears bahar ki taraf hote hain, you can remember. So hearing is most lateral, although balance is also part of ears. So these two are placed laterally. Anyway, so now we will start and we'll talk about each of these nerves separately. Okay. So let's see. Okay, so now I'll be talking about the one by one the afferent functional columns. The medial most functional column, as I told you, in this lamina, you have two visceral components, general visceral afferent and general visceral afferent and special visceral afferent. So in this functional column, the medial most afferent functional column, you have only a single nucleus, and that nucleus is positioned in the medulla, and it extends both in the open and closed portion of the medulla. Upper portion of the medulla is open. Why? It is forming the floor of the fourth ventricle dorsally, while the lower portion is within the medulla. So this is between the open and closed portion of the medulla, and that is nucleus tractus solitarius. Okay, so combined nucleus here, upper part and lower part of this nucleus has been divided. Upper part, you can remember that nucleus tractus solitarius, which is a combined nucleus of general visceral afferent and special visceral afferent sensations. Upper part, you can remember upper means something, people who are VIP or they're asked to sit in the balconies. So you can say special people, right? Special people are asked to sit upper position. So this way you can remember that upper lying nuclei of this functional column will be special visceral afferents, while the lower one is for the general public. Lower seats are always for the general public. So in this lower portion of the nucleus tractus solitarius, it will be the general visceral afferent nucleus. Got it? So in the upper portion, that is special visceral afferent nucleus, there will be fibers given fibers from tongue, the taste sensations from and the positioning here is like let me draw it so it will be explained better. You can see here that the tongue is positioned like this with this sulcus terminalis. Okay. So that means the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, that's the sensations from the tongue, anterior 2/3, and the hard palate, except the circumvallate papillae, those sensations will be, taste sensations will be brought in through the facial nerve, and that will be placed above in this nucleus. The next posterior 1/3 of the sensations, the taste sensations of the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, including the circumvallate papillae, those sensations will be brought in here in the lower portion of upper segment of this nucleus tractus solitarius. Then the posterior most, the sensations, taste sensations from the posterior most portion of the tongue, that's called vallicula, as well as from the epiglottis, the taste sensations will be brought in through the vagus. So vagus will reach, the sensations, taste will reach here in the lower portion of the upper segment of nucleus tractus solitarius. Got it? Then the lower portion of this, lower segment of this nucleus tractus solitarius, that will receive afferents, and those will be carrying sensations. What type of? General visceral afferent sensations. General visceral afferent sensations is the sensations of stretch, touch, pressure, and pain sensations and temperature sensations from the viscera. So here the sensations will be brought in through, you can add up, actually they have, not mentioned here, even the facial nerve also has this functional component. So lower part, sensations will be brought in from the submandibular salivary gland, sublingual salivary gland, lacrimal gland. So the sensations from these glands will be brought in, the general visceral afferent sensations will be brought in the lower portion of this nucleus through the facial nerve. Then the general visceral sensations from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, from the tonsils, glossopharyngeal is not only special sensory but also general sensory from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, right? Then also from the tonsils, then also from the pharynx, and from, important is that from the carotid body and carotid sinus also, the general visceral afferent sensations are brought through this 9th nerve into the lower segment of the nucleus tractus solitarius. Then there is a lot of visceral sensations which is being, this is the longest cranial nerve, that vagus. So this will bring in general visceral afferent sensations from the pharynx, the posterior portion of the posterior most portion of the tongue, the pharynx, the larynx, then the trachea, respiratory system, then the GIT, right, esophagus, stomach, duodenum, small intestine and all, the extent to which this facial nerve supplies all the viscera, even from the heart. So all those general sensations from the viscera will be brought in by vagus in the lowest portion of this nucleus tractus solitarius. I hope you've understood all the special visceral and general visceral afferent sensations which are brought by these nerves, the same nerves in all of them, the three nerves. This is easy for you to remember because the nerve supply of tongue, the taste sensations, is very much taught to you and you know it even. So 7th, 9th and 10th for both in the upper portion, and 7th, 9th and 10th for the general visceral afferent in the lower portion. So that was about nucleus tractus solitarius. Then, and remember, it's the only nucleus in the entire functional column, right? Then there is another sensation, special sensation, that is called gustatory. I have already discussed about this. Gustatory is a special visceral afferent sensation, but olfactory sensation is also having a debate. There is, it's a controversial type of sensation. There are authors, scientists. Some say that olfactory pathway, the sensations of olfactions should be categorized as special somatic afferent, and the reason they give special somatic, remember the lateral most functional column, they actually, olfactory and optic nerve, they're not a part of brainstem, right? And these functional columns have been designed for the nuclear arrangement of the cranial nerves, that is 3 to 12 within the brainstem. But first and second, they arise from the telencephalon, so they don't have a nuclear here, but the functional, the functionality of these optic nerve and olfactory nerve have to be categorized. So it's said that olfactory pathway should be considered as special somatic afferent, and the reason they give is that olfactory mucosa, that is in the roof of the nasal chamber, nasal cavity, that is ectodermal in origin. So just like the 8th nerve and the optic nerve, that optic nerve is considered as special somatic afferent. Both 8th and 2nd nerve, they are considered as special somatic afferents. So they say that why olfactory should also be considered as special somatic afferent, because the nasal epithelium, the mucosa, olfactory epithelium, is derived from ectoderm. But people who are advocating, the scientists who advocate for this olfactory pathway to be considered as special visceral afferent, they give this reason that olfactory pathway is very much closely interlinked with the gustatory pathway. That means if you try to experiment, like you try to taste something with your nose closed, completely clamp your nostrils, and then you eat, you will not be able to relish the taste very much. The reason is olfactory and gustatory pathway are very much interlinked. So some say that it should be special visceral afferent, and some say it is olfactory pathway is special somatic afferent. So let's move further, then we'll keep talking about these things. I think this topic has also been discussed in my lecture on olfactory pathway. You can listen to that lecture for better understanding. Okay, so now I will be showing you the images of these nuclei, how they are arranged in the brain stem. So here we are talking is about the most medial functional column, that is general visceral afferent plus special visceral afferent because the two functional columns they join and form a single nucleus, and that is nucleus tractus solitarius. So in the given image, there's a brainstem, this is midbrain, this is bulged anteriorly, the pons, the nodular thing, then you have this medulla, and down below is spinal cord. This is the ventricular connectivity from aqueduct of Sylvius. Then you have this fourth ventricle down below the level of obex. It continues the central canal of the spinal cord, and it's the cerebellum behind. And let me tell you that what is hindbrain. If it's asked, like, hindbrain includes three portions: pons, medulla, and cerebellum. And hindbrain is rhombencephalon, and it's further divided into metencephalon and myelencephalon. So pons and cerebellum is considered as metencephalon, and medulla is called the myelencephalon. Anyways, we are not going further in that. Let's stay to this. And there are different nuclei placed here in the brainstem. I mean, this is a sagittal section you're seeing here. So the blue color nuclei you're seeing, they are the motor nuclei, means they are the functional components of the basal lamina. They placed in the basal lamina. That means these blue color nuclei will be medially placed. Then the red color nuclei you are seeing, they are all nuclei of afferent nerves, right? Afferent means sensory nerves. So they are laterally placed in the LR lamina. So there you find that the red color nuclei are laterally placed, right? This is a special nucleus which is red in color, and that's the red nucleus placed in the upper portion of the midbrain at the level of oculomotor nerve nucleus. Okay, so this is red nucleus. So the green color nucleus is the nucleus we are talking about. That's nucleus tractus solitarius. You can see it's an elongated nucleus, and you can see it is extending in both the upper open portion of medulla as well as in the closed portion of medulla. Then you can see there are nerves arising from this nucleus tractus solitarius. In fact, you can trace it that it continues with this red color nerve, and it emerges out with this facial nerve. Facial nerve, you can identify that it's taking this loop shape around the abducent nerve nucleus. So that means this nerve, this fibers from the upper portion of the nucleus tractus solitarius, you can see they continuous with this nerve, which emerging, you can see that this nerve emerges lateral to the facial nerve, and this nerve, by now you must have guessed that this nerve is nervus intermedius, and it's bringing the taste sensation from the anterior to the tongue, including the hard palate except circumvallate papillae. Okay, so then 9th nerve will be bringing here sensations, then 10th nerve will be bringing here sensations of taste. Then in the lower segments, general visceral afferent sensations will be brought in from facial nerve, from 9th nerve and 10th nerve. So this is about the nucleus of tractus solitarius. This I have just given you an image so that you can remember that this olfactory nerve, these are around 16 to 20 million olfactory first order neurons. The important point about the olfactory, there are a lot of peculiar points. You can go into my watch this lecture on olfactory nerve. Here I am just telling you in a brief way that the 16 to 20 neurons, they form the first order neurons of olfactory pathway, as well as these are the receptors as well, and they perforate. And when they perforate the cribriform palate, the inside of the anterior fossa, these are around 16 to 20 in number. Imagine 16 to 20 million neurons. They collect and they form bundles with thousands of nerve fibers together, and they form 16 to 20 nerves, right? Those are called phyla olfactoria, which pierce this cribriform palate and they reach into this olfactory bulb. So these nerves, they have also been categorized as special visceral afferent. That's why I discussed this nerve over here. They may also be considered as special somatic afferent. Okay, so this was about the olfactory nerve. Now is the next functional column, and this is general somatic afferent. General somatic afferent functional column. This functional column, can you see here, right? This is laterally placed lateral to this visceral afferent functional column is this general somatic afferent, and this is completely taken up by this nucleus, trigeminal nerve nucleus, which has three components. This is the main sensory nucleus, the chief nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, which is located in the upper pons. Above to this, this nucleus is continuous above up till the upper portion of the midbrain at the level of superior colliculus, and this nucleus is again a peculiar nucleus. This is mesencephalic nucleus. Then this portion here, it extends down here. It's a longitudinal nucleus, and it even reaches to the spinal, crosses the lower pons, complete medulla, and reaches the upper two segments of the spinal cord. So that's why it's called the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. So a brief description about this is that this is the chief sensory nucleus. It receives proprioceptive sensations as well as exteroceptive sensations from the face, and structures deep below the face as well. While this portion is mesencephalic nucleus, and it mainly receives the proprioceptive sensations, although exteroceptive sensations as well, but mainly the proprioceptive sensations from the muscles of the head and neck region. And the peculiarity about this is the normally in sensory nerves you have been taught about that the first order neurons in general, in general sensory fibers I'm talking about, is that the first order neurons are pseudo unipolar neurons. So the cytons lie outside the CNS in the form of ganglia. Like you have this trigeminal ganglion, the Gesserian ganglion. In the spinal nerves, you have DRG, dorsal root ganglion. In the facial nerve, you have this geniculate ganglion. In the glossopharyngeal and vagus, you have superior and inferior ganglion of the nerve. These are all sensory ganglion, and they are placed outside the body. But here, this first order neurons, proprioceptive fibers, they are unipolar. They're not pseudo-unipolar, they're unipolar. So the first order neurons, they don't have a central process, they have a peripheral process, and they straight away reach here. The cytons lie here in this mesencephalic. So it's this the site where you find, the only site where you find is unipolar neurons. Got it? So this receives impulses, proprioceptive impulses from the muscles of head and neck region. Then down below is another important nucleus, and that's the nucleus, the spinal nucleus of trigeminal, and it is important. Why? Because it receives the pain and temperature sensations, including fine touch as well. So this is spinal nucleus of trigeminal. Let's study about them. All the nuclei in this group are related to trigeminal nerve. Mesencephalic nucleus, this nucleus receives proprioceptive sensations mainly from, of course, the fifth nerve, but it will receive sensations, fifth nerve is also a motor nerve, right? It's a branchial motor nerve, and it innervates the muscles of mastications, right, including tensor tympani, tensor veli palatini, right? And these muscles, they're all innervated by this. Even the mylohyoid, antibelly of digastric. So sensations from these muscles will be brought in here, as well as, remember, the sensations of proprioceptive sensations from the teeth, as well as temporomandibular joint. Remember the jaw jerk. The jaw jerk which you do, the sensations are brought in here. So, and not only from the muscles of mastications, from all the branchial arches, the second branchial arch, this muscles of facial expression, the sensations are brought in here. Then stylopharyngeus, the third arch muscle, the sensations are brought in here. Then muscles of pharynx, soft palate, larynx, that's like, fourth and sixth branchial arches, the sensations from those muscles are brought in here. And don't forget, even the muscles derived from somatomeres from the cranial nerve, that includes the extraocular muscles, the sensations are brought in here. Then the muscles of the tongue, the proprioceptive sensations from the muscles of the tongue are also brought in here, and including trapezius and what I was saying, trapezius and sternocleidomastoid. These sensations, although will follow the pathway of the spinal nerves, right? That is, the dorsal column. Okay, so that was about the mesencephalic. Now, main sensory or the superior sensory nucleus, as I told you, this was, exteroceptive sensations from the face and the structures deep to the face and inside the cranium as well from them. So, stretch, vibration, 2-point discrimination, and all different exteroceptive sensations brought in here. Now, the lower portion, the elongated portion, is the spinal nucleus. The spinal nucleus actually has been, researched by a lot of scientists. They have gone into working upon this nucleus. So they have found that this nucleus also has a somatotropic representation of the face. So they have divided into different parts, like pars caudalis. Pars caudalis, it represents the forehead portion. Caudalis means below. And pars oralis is oralis means which represents the face, which represents the mouth, the nostril area, right? They have openings of nostrils and the oral fissure. So that area is pars oralis. That's placed above there. And in between you have pars interpolaris, that represents the area of the cheeks. I have made a slide for this. I'll explain it once again. Okay, although it has already been explained, I believe, when you want to go into the details, you can check my lecture on trigeminal nerve. There also I have taught you about this. Now these nuclei receive exteroceptive sensations through here I'm talking about this. यहाँ पे तो let me tell you कि यहाँ पे here I have included, you can include the nerves, this mesencephalic sensations, proprioception sensations brought with third nerve, fourth nerve, sixth nerve, fifth already has been mentioned here, then seventh nerve, ninth nerve, 10th nerve, right, 11th nerve, 12th nerve. So all these muscles, they supply muscles, right? So sensations of proprioceptive are being brought in. These nerves, all these nerves reach to the mesencephalic. Here it's only the trigeminal nerve which reaches there in the main sensory. That's why it's only for trigeminal main sensory nucleus. Spinal nucleus, the sensations here will be brought in from the exteroceptive sensations and includes this. Remember, this spinal will receive sensations of pain and temperature and fine touch. These nuclei receive exteroceptive sensations from the 5th nerve, 7th nerve, 10th cranial nerve. Okay, so let's study about this further. Okay, now you are seeing this nucleus, that is mesencephalic nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, right? So from the upper pons, it is extending up to the midbrain, the upper portion of midbrain, crossing this trochlear nerve nucleus and reaching adjacent to this oculomotor nerve nucleus. And I told you already, all the muscles in the head and neck region, their proprioceptive sensations are brought in to the mesencephalic nucleus. Got it? Including the sensations from the teeth, from the jaw, Okay, the TMJ, temporomandibular joint also. Okay. Then this is the principal sensory nucleus, the chief sensory nucleus of trigeminal. You can see it is lying lateral to the blue color nucleus, because blue color is M4 motor, M4 medial. So that's the motor nucleus of trigeminal lying medially, and you are seeing the sagittal section from the medial side. So that's why you are seeing is this motor nucleus of trigeminal, and laterally placed is this main sensory nucleus of trigeminal. And you know, it receives all extraceptive sensations from the VI, V2, V3 division of trigeminal nerve. Okay. So now we are talking about the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, and it's actually the nucleus as well as lateral placed to the nucleus is the spinal tract of trigeminal nerve. That is, and it's bringing in general somatic afferent sensations, mainly pain, temperature, and fine touch. Okay. And it's a very long nucleus, and when it crosses this medulla, you know, there is a posterolateral sulcus, right? Posterolateral sulcus of medulla provides attachment to 9th, 10th, and 11th cranial nerves from its rootlets. So if you trace this, posterolateral sulcus, right, there you will find the olives anteriorly, and posteriorly the inferior cerebellar peduncles. So in the lateral portion here, when you will find this, there is prominence. There's a prominence on the side of the upper medulla, and that is called tuber cinereum. The tuber cinereum is the bulging seen laterally in the posterolateral sulcus on the upper medulla because of this spinal nucleus and spinal tract of the trigeminal nerve, and this nucleus will reach down in the first and second segment of the cervical nerves. Okay. Look at this. I have made this specially for you to make you understand this spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve in detail. Here you are seeing is this spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. And as I told you, by the researchers, scholars, they have divided, they have studied a lot about it. They have found that it has a somatotropic representation. That's how I have drawn it here, so to make you convenient to understand. So look here, they have divided this portion, the upper segment, as called pars oralis. This is called pars oralis. Okay. Then the middle portion is called pars interpolaris, and the lowest portion is called pars caudalis. Caudalis, is the tail portion. How to differentiate is like, this one, pars oralis, extends from the lower pons up till the origin of 12th cranial nerve in the medulla. That much extension is called pars oralis. And pars interpolaris is from the origin of, 12th cranial nerve up till the obex, that is the, posterior. If you see the fourth ventricle, the infromedial, infrolateral boundaries of the fourth ventricle where they meet, and this fourth ventricle continues as the central canal of the spinal cord. That point is called obex. So from this 12th nerve nucleus till the obex, this much portion of the spinal nucleus is called pars interpolaris. From obex down till the spinal segment C2, that much portion is called pars caudalis. One thing is clear now. So this is a somatotropic representation. Important is, that's why I was telling that pars oralis is in the proportion. So this area, is called the muzzle area, where you have nostrils and oral aperture, the, sensations of fine touch from the orofacial nostril region. These are brought in and relayed here in the pars oralis. Then from the cheeks portion, right, this middle portion, the cheeks, then fine touch and this type of sensations includes this cheek portion down below. Remember, it includes the teeth and temporomandibular joint. Although teeth and temporal, the proprioceptive will reach there above in the mesencephalic, but the touch sensation, right? Touch, pain, temperature. They will, from the cheeks, they will reach here in the pars interpolaris. And the forehead region, it's an inverted representation, right? So the for a forehead region, nociceptions like pain sensations, as well as the fine touch and temperature related sensations, they will be from the forehead, they will be brought into the pars caudalis. So this is about the spinal nerve nucleus, and as I said, this I have made it for you to understand. Okay, now I will be teaching you about the lateral most functional column, that is the special somatic afferent functional column, and it includes the nuclei of, this is the special somatic afferent functional column, the lateral most. It includes nuclei of eighth nerve, that is the vestibular nerve, and even lateral to that is the cochlear nerve nucleus. So they are placed in the lateral most functional column, and they are arranged adjacent. I'll tell you, cochlear nerve nucleus lies dorsal and ventral to the inferior cerebellar peduncles, and even this lies medial to the dorsomedial to the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Okay, so there are two nuclei here: cochlear nerve nucleus, which has a dorsal and ventral portion, two parts mein, and that is related to above and below to the dorsal and ventral to the inferior cerebellar peduncle, while vestibular nucleus is having four subparts. It has a superior portion, inferior portion, that is called spinal portion, as well as medial and a lateral subnucleus. So vestibular nucleus has four subnucleus, and functional column of both of them is special somatic afferent, right? Okay, then as I told you, this visual pathway is also included in this special somatic afferent, and the debate still continues about olfactory pathway. Some say that olfactory is also part of special somatic afferent. Okay, so let's say this now. Nucleus, this is the vestibular nucleus. As I told you that the vestibular nucleus is having four subnuclei. It is having four subnuclei. Now look here. This diagram you are seeing is the dorsal portion of the brainstem, and this is the cavity of the fourth ventricle, and there are these superior cerebellar peduncles, right? And this is the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So adjacent to the inferior cerebellar peduncle, you'll find that these five, in this nucleus located. Here you seeing that this the from this it brings in sensations. There are two types of receptors in the internal ear. From the semicircular canals, the ampulla, there is the crista, which receives the dynamic equilibrium, like and this utricle and saccule, they have macula, which receives the static balance, sensations of static balance. So from the crista and maculae, these are the sensations of equilibrium which is brought in through the vestibular nerve, and they are relayed here in this nuclear complex. So actually remember that it's a nuclear complex, vestibular nuclear complex. There was another nuclear complex related to which cranial nerve? Have you guessed it? I taught you that also in detail. If you go to my lecture on if you go to my lecture on oculomotor nerve is also a nuclear complex, and there the right and left nuclei, they coalesce ventrally to form a complex. There is a subnuclear for the different 5 extraocular muscles that oculomotor nerve innervates, separate nuclei for all of them. And if you still remember, there was something very important related to the lower motor neurons supplying the superior rectus muscle. याद आया? that superior rectus is the muscle which is innervated by the contralateral lower motor neurons. Got it? And the other nerve which innervates the lower motor neuron from the contralateral side is trochlear nerve. The superior oblique, superior rectus is two muscles which are innervated by contralateral lower motor neurons. Anyway, so now again let's look at this image now. This is like, a horizontally placed brain stem. You have a pons here, you have this medulla here, you have this brain, midbrain here, the third ventricle here, the thalamus, then you have this tectum, then this is the central aqueduct, this is the fourth ventricle, the flora, right? So just below the fourth ventricle, you find laterally there is this vestibular nerve nuclear complex. And one important thing is that this nucleus is so much deeply placed in the tegmental portion of the pons that if you see the fourth ventricle in the floor, you find this vestibular area. Its prominence is even seen in the floor of the fourth ventricle. Laterally, you find is a vestibular eminence, so vestibular triangular area in the floor of the fourth ventricle, because it is deeply placed in the tegmentum of the pons. Okay, so that was about the vestibular nuclear complex. Okay, now I'm talking is about the cochlear nerve nucleus. Cochlear nerve has two nucleus. You have a ventral and a dorsal nucleus, and both are related, ventral and dorsal, in relation to the inferior cerebellar peduncles. So here in this diagram, the green colored nucleus you seeing is the anterior or the ventral cochlear nerve nucleus. It receives direct sensations from the organ of Corti. The first order neurons from the organ of Corti, they relay here, and they are bipolar neurons. Okay. Then here in this diagram you are seeing is the posterior cochlear nucleus. This is posteriorly lying, posterior to the inferior cerebellar peduncle, and this also is receiving the, first order sensory neurons from the organ of Corti. Okay. Then you have this optic nerve, as I said that because of the same functional column. Just to remind you that don't forget that optic nerve is also included physiologically, that this function is included as special somatic afferent sensation. Okay. Finally, this is just fast. You can see how they are located. This is the basal lamina. These are the three group of nuclei, right? Third, fourth, sixth, and hypoglossal in the general somatic efferent, and special visceral efferent. You have the nuclei of the branchial arches. You have this first arch, trigeminal motor nucleus, second arch, facial nerve nucleus, and glossopharyngeal for third, and for fourth and sixth it is the 10th and 11th cranial portion of 11th nerve. Together they form this longitudinal nucleus called nucleus ambiguous. Okay, then you have this nucleus. This also is an efferent functional column. This is general visceral efferent for the smooth muscles, and this will be a parasympathetic outflow. For this, there's Erengo-Westphal nucleus, right? Then this is for the ciliaris and constrictor pupillae, and then you have this lacrymatory nucleus for the lacrymatory gland. Then you have superior salivatory is for this submandibular, as well as the lingual salivary glands and sublingual salivary glands. And then you have this inferior salivatory nucleus. This is why the glossopharyngeal and which will supply the parotid gland. And then you have this dorsal nucleus of vagus, which will supply all the smooth muscles right from the head and neck region down below in all the thoracic and abdominal viscera. Okay, then there was this LR lamina, the afferent functional columns. Here you see this was the only functional column in the visceral or the medial most functional column in the LR lamina, and that is nucleus tractus solitarius. It was including general visceral afferent and special visceral afferent fibers. I have taught you in detail. Then this one is the general somatic afferent functional column. This is completely taken up by the trigeminal nerve, which includes mesencephalic nucleus. Then you have the main chief sensory nucleus and the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal, and the lateral most is special somatic afferent functional column. This, as I said, it's a nuclear complex, the vestibular nuclear complex, and you can see that is the fourth ventricle, the boundaries of the fourth ventricle. It's similar to that of popliteal fossa. If you remember, it has supromedial supralateral boundaries, inframedial infralateral boundaries. Supralateral boundary is formed by the superior cerebellar peduncle. Inframedial infralateral boundary is formed by the inferior cerebellar peduncle, and these margins have an elevated extensions, and those are called superior medullary vellum and inferior medullary vellum. So the lateral most impression on the floor of the fourth ventricle is because of this vestibular nucleus called the vestibular area, and there you find that this inferior cerebellar peduncle on the two sides, these are the two cochlear nerve nucleus, and this has been zoomed out, this tractus solitarius, as I have taught you in this lecture, that the upper portion was for special visceral afferent and the lower portion was for general visceral afferent, and that includes sensations from 7th, 9th and 10th cranial nerve for the taste sensation as well as for the general sensations. Okay, so that I have already taught everything in detail. Now just about the special features here, special features of few nuclei. Facial nerve nuclei, as I am telling you, facial nerve nuclei mein the peculiarity is about the upper motor neurons. Lower motor neurons are same, like from the nucleus of the facial nerve, the lower motor neurons reach and supply the muscles on the ipsilateral half of the face. So in lower motor neurons is easy, but in upper motor neurons, normally in any nerve, if you say, from the cerebral cortex, from the primary motor cortex areas, the upper motor neurons, they descend, and most of the fibers, they decussate and they reach the opposite nucleus, while few fibers continue to the ipsilateral nucleus. That's a normal pattern. But in case of facial nerve, there's this important thing that the motor cortex representing the area of the face, from there the upper motor neurons, which represent the contralateral lower half of the face, those fibers from the cerebral cortex, they only reach to the contralateral nucleus. They do not have an ipsilateral upper motor neurons. So remember, the important thing about the facial nerve nucleus is that the upper motor neurons reach to the opposite side of the lower half of the face. Okay, that's why in supranuclear facial nerve palsy and infranuclear facial nerve palsy, you have been taught about that there is an infranuclear, that's called Bell's palsy. The ipsilateral half of the face is paralyzed, while in supranuclear unilateral, right, only unilateral, with which you'll appreciate this. So if there is unilateral upper motor neuron paralysis or supranuclear paralysis of the facial nerve, what will happen? Only the opposite side, lower half of the face, lower quadrant of the face on the opposite side will be paralyzed, because the upper of the half of the face, even the same side and contralateral side, has a bilateral representation. So in supranuclear paralysis, there is paralysis of contralateral lower quadrant of the face, while in infranuclear paralysis of the facial nerve, there will be same side paralysis, half of the face. Now about this, again, important thing is about 11th cranial nerve. Now 11th cranial nerve, has two parts. It's the cranial portion of 11th nerve, and it's the spinal accessory portion. It's called accessory nerve. So this is cranial accessory, this is the spinal accessory. And this nucleus, is nucleus ambiguous. So this is for the third arch glossopharyngeal, for the fourth and Sixth arch, the two nerves, vagus and cranial accessory, they together join to form, you can see the cranial portion of accessory and vagus together join to form the vago-accessory complex, and that innervates the muscle of the soft palate, the pharynx and the larynx. So that is how this is supplying. Now important about thing is this spinal nucleus of accessory nerve. This also has a lot of controversy. Some say that this is general somatic efferent. Some say it is special visceral efferent. There's a debate about this also. Now about this, let me tell you the reasons behind people calling it as general somatic efferent. They say that sternocleidomastoid and trapezius are not derived from branchial arches, right? So they are supposed to be the muscles derived from somites. So that's why they claim that the spinal nucleus should be treated as general somatic efferent. While people who advocate for this special visceral efferent function of this spinal nucleus of accessory, they say that this actually is in vertical alignment with nucleus ambiguus, and this embryologically this is actually the detached portion of nucleus ambiguus, so it's just in vertical alignment with nucleus ambiguus. So it is a detached portion of nucleus ambiguus is one point. Then another thing is, this is from C1 to C5 spinal segments of the spinal cord, right? So all the efferent nerves, efferent nerve roots, right, they emerge from the anterolateral sulcus of the spinal cord, right? But the fibers of spinal accessory nerve, they do not emerge from the anterior horn or the anterolateral sulcus of the spinal cord. They emerge from in between anterior and dorsal horns on the lateral aspect of the spinal cord. And this, when they join together, the five segments, then roots from the five segments, when they join to form a spinal accessory nerve, it enters the cranium through the foramen magnum. And let me tell you that it enters into the foramen cranium through the foramen magnum. It passes behind the ligamentum denticulatum. This also shows that it is not so much having that features of special of general somatic efferent, because efferents are always having an anterior origin from the spinal cord. Got it? So there is still a debate about this function nucleus also, whether it is a general somatic efferent or special visceral efferent. Anyways, so this nerve which reaches in the cranium, when it crosses the jugular foramen, within the jugular foramen, remember, within the jugular foramen, the spinal accessory nerve first joins its own component, that is cranial accessory, for a short distance, and then gets separated and emerges out separately from the jugular foramen, while the cranial portion of accessory joins this vagus at which point? Where does it joins? Here, this point of junction is important. So cranial accessory joins the vagus at the inferior ganglion of vagus. Okay? And another important question here is, let me draw it for you so it will be better to visualize it. This is the entry point of jugular foramen, and this is the exit point of jugular foramen. Got it? So this actually is the jugular canal through which this nerve is passing. These nerves are passing. Now you got to see very easy thing. If it is asked how many nerves, how many cranial nerves, or how many nerves, cranial nerves, let me specify, because there is meningeal branch also of vagus, which is actually entering back into the cranium. So it's better to call cranial nerves. The question is, now I'm asking is like, how many cranial nerves enter the jugular foramen? The answer will be 4. You have glossopharyngeal, vagus, cranial accessory, and spinal. Then if it's asked how many cranial nerve emerge out of jugular foramen, the answer will be 3. So this is also an important point. You should note it here that there are 4 nerves which enter into the jugular foramen, and when they emerge out they become 3. And the reason is that the cranial accessory joins vagus to form a vago-accessory complex. This is vago-accessory complex. Okay, then this another important thing is about this hypoglossal nerve nucleus. It is general somatic efferent nerve nucleus placed most medially in the medulla. It's also an elongated nucleus. Now here it is somewhat the same thing which was happening in facial nerve nucleus, right? So from this cerebral, lower motor neurons, no problem. All these, all the, hypoglossal nerve, from its nucleus, the lower motor neuron supplies all the 7 out of 8 muscles of the tongue on the same side. Clear? Palatoglossus is having a different cranioaccessory supply, but rest 7 of them, they are all innervated by hypoglossal nerve, the same side. So lower motor neurons, no debates, no problems. Now about the upper motor neurons reaching to the hypoglossal nerve nucleus. So this also, remember, tongue also has a big somatotropic representation on the motor homunculus area number 4, that is precentral gyrus. So from there, this upper motor neurons, they descend down to the hypoglossal nerve nucleus, but the fibers to genioglossus, they decussate and they reach the opposite nucleus only. Important point is only. Rest of the muscles, they have a normal pattern that most of the fibers decussate, some of the fibers they reach into the ipsilateral nucleus. So the rest of the muscles, they have a bilateral representation from the upper motor neurons, but genioglossus has only contralateral representation, right? The upper motor neurons of the genioglossus from the cerebral cortex, they reach only in the contralateral nucleus, right? So that's why in supranuclear lesions, genioglossus will be paralyzed of the opposite side. That was about this. So facial nerve में the lower opposite quadrant of the face, genioglossus में opposite genioglossus. Then the third in category, which they have not mentioned here, let me draw it so you understand it a better way. Here I'm drawing is the nuclei of spinal accessory nerve. Spinal accessory nerve, you have this cerebral cortex here, right? And of course the muscles of the neck down below, sternocleido and trapezius. So let's say this is sternocleidomastoid of the 2 sides. This is sternocleidomastoid, and this is trapezius. This is trapezius. So important is that the upper motor neurons for sternocleidomastoid, they reach the same side nucleus, and from there they innervate, of course, lower motor neurons, no problems. Lower motor neurons always supply the muscles of the same side. Lower motor neurons will supply the muscles of the same side, no problems. But about this upper motor neurons to trapezius, important is that they reach the opposite nucleus only. So that's an important point here also. In case of this is spinal nucleus of 11th nerve, ठीक है, 11th cranial nerve. So this you should remember. This is the same thing for, peculiarities are for facial nerve. Remember about the facial nerve nucleus, about the genioglossus in hypoglossal, and for the trapezius, This is trapezius and this is sternocleidomastoid. So trapezius is innervated in its upper motor neurons only contralaterally. And another important thing is about sternocleidomastoid also. That sternocleidomastoid is not like others that it has a bilateral. Sternocleidomastoid is being innervated only on the ipsilateral side. The upper motor neurons to sternocleidomastoid are not decussing, they're going on the same side. So this is also important about the supranuclear fibers or upper motor neurons. For the sternocleidomastoid, they reach the spinal nucleus on the same side, and upper motor neurons for destined to supply trapezius, they reach only on the contralateral nucleus. Got it? So that was about the special features of this afferent functional columns. I have taught you, and about the special nucleus that also has been done, right? So this is all been done, and I have. So finally, you have got to know about all the details. It's a detailed lecture about the afferent functional columns and special features about the nuclei of different nerve, that also has been done. So you can go and revise my previous lectures from a playlist if you have not understood the previous topics, and because this is important to understand the brain stem. Okay, so thank you for being connected and listening, and happy learning.